I'll check on my YouTube if it's live right
It's
now.
it now
It's
says
fine.
live on yours, Amy. It says live now.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I see it on YouTube. It's live now too.
You're good. You start the show.
Okay, all right. So, can we start off, Nico, with having you introduce yourself and give us a brief background on your case?
I'm Nico Claux. I'm an author, painter, publisher, artist. Now I'm a curator for an international exhibition uh, on serial killers, and formerly known as the Vampire of Paris in the 90s. And I was arrested in the 90s, in 1994, for a homicide, and then I was released in 2002. And ever since then, I've published books, and I am known for my portraits. I do portraits of criminals. Usually, I do portraits of criminals based on their mug shots. That's what I do, and yeah, that's a pretty good resume of what I do.
Okay. Do you feel comfortable talking about your case, like how it came about, the MO, everything like that?
Yeah. It's past. The past is the past. Yeah. No worries. So it happened in the early 90s. Um, like it wasn't a thing like I woke up and I decided to do this. I had those what we call intrusive thoughts. That's like things that go in your head when you're a teenager or even earlier. In my case, it's when I was a kid. So I had those intrusive thoughts when I was a very young boy, and I was obsessed with crimes and death and physical death, not the spiritual aspect or what goes on after life or the ghosts and stuff like that, but more like what happens to your body, your physical body after death, and all the process that goes on, which was very intriguing to me when I was a boy. And I was exposed to death when I was 10. I had a death in the family, so I was at the wake. So I saw my first dead body when I was 10 years old. And then a little bit later, I was exposed to crime scene photographs. That's something that had an impact on me. It was a really famous case in Paris called the Japanese cannibal. It was a man called Issei Sagawa who had committed those crimes in Paris in 1982. And back then, there was a magazine, a famous magazine in France, who published crime scene photographs that were, morgue photographs that were taken in the Paris morgue. And I saw those photos, and it began a lifelong fascination with those kind of things. Later on, I developed violent fantasies when I was a little bit older. I was living in Portugal back then. And then, things starting to, build up. And the fantasies became more and more present in my life. I just couldn't think of anything else. And later on in life, I decided to work as a morgue attendant. So it was after I came back from the military, because there was a mandatory military draft when I was 19. So I spent 1 year in the military. I learned how to shoot in the military. It's kind of important for what happened next. And I became a morgue attendant. And when I was a morgue attendant, I tried different things. I more or less desensitized myself doing autopsies and doing things like that. I also acted on a fantasy that I had about tasting human flesh. So before doing that, I was drinking blood, my own blood, and blood. I was doing this since I was a teenager, so it was a progression. People always ask me, "Oh yeah, why did you do this? Why did you do that?" It didn't happen in the space of 1 year. It was like when I was a teenager, and it led one thing led to another. That's what I have to say about this.
Can you talk a little bit about the cannibalism and how you got into it, and like what it tastes like, and all that?
So, as I told you before, I was very intrigued by the case of Issei Sagawa, and I was wondering about the taste and about human anatomy. That was an obsession. So I was reading anatomy books. In Paris itself, there's a few anatomy museums where you can see actual specimens. So that was really important also in the development of my fantasy life, because I actually saw, human bodies flayed without the skin, with the muscles exposed, because there was this French anatomist who had a process, it's called Fragonard, and he had this process of creating those sculptures. They're not really sculptures because they're real human bodies. And you can actually see the muscles, the definition of the muscles. And it's like statues, but they're actually dead bodies, preserved because they're from the 17th century, preserved in wax. And it's kind of more or less the same technique that was used by Gunther von Hagen, which is a German doctor who invented a process called plastination. So yeah, I was this, teenager seeing that with my own eyes, developing those, ideas. Also developing an actual interest in death work. And it was the late 80s. So of course, back then you wouldn't have the internet and, forums and groups and people talking to each other. And, it was just me and having absolutely no access to info other than museums and anatomy books. So I didn't ask myself any question about whether it was normal or what, just because I knew that was my thing, and I always felt disconnected with other people anyway. So I didn't care about what they thought or if I was normal or not. I knew that I was off, that something was off, but I didn't ask myself any like existential questions whether it was right or wrong, because I didn't have those notions. I wasn't raised in a especially religious background, and for me it was just about what I felt was good for me or not, or my interests or not, and those things I really like the atmosphere of the graveyards, for example, those kind of things. I had bones at home because I would go to graveyards and find ways to get the bones. There was also, in Paris, there's a place called the Catacombs where you can actually go, and there's a special part where you can get bones. So, there was actual ways to more or less find stuff. When I was old enough, I had my own place, so I could actually recreate my little universe around me and have those things around me and those things I liked. So the first time I applied for this job, the job in the morgue, first I wanted to be an embalmer. So I actually called a school, an embalming school, and they told me what I had to pay for. I had the impression that it was really complicated to actually be an embalmer. So about the same period as my other grandfather who passed away, I was still in the army at the time, so I had a special leave, and I went to the hospital morgue. I saw him, and this is where I realized, okay, I was seeing the guy who was working there, and I was like, okay, this is the guy I want to be. This is what I want to do. This is exactly the kind of job I want to have. I don't need to be an embalmer to be there. It's easy. I just have to apply to a few hospitals. Of course, I have no formal experience in that, but they're so desperate because at the time they were desperate to actually find people who were willing to work in a morgue that after a couple of tries and after sending a few resumes here and there, I actually found a job in a morgue. So I learned everything there from scratch. There's no school. There's nothing. It's the other guys who actually teach you how to do things. We were a crew of 3 people, and in the morning I was in the morgue. I was doing the autopsies. I was doing the I know the French words, but I don't really know the English words, the equivalents. But you show the bodies to the visitors, people who visit them. So you have to get them out of the fridge, put them on a special special thing, a gurney, I don't know how to call it, and you have to prepare the room. You have to do all those things. You have to put them in their caskets for their final viewings. All those little things that you might have seen in movies, but in real life it's really different. It's an actual job. Okay. So I learned all this, and after a while I was left alone in the autopsy rooms. One part of the things that I had to do was to stitch up the bodies back, and I realized that it was kind of easy to actually cut a few pieces, cut a few slices. And first, I just tasted how it was like, and then I realized that it would be easy for me to bring boxes, plastic, those small plastic boxes, put those slices in the boxes and bring them home. This is what I did. So I was working in the morning in the morgue. In the afternoon, I was working in the surgery unit, digestive surgery. So it's hernias and all those things. Okay. And one of the things we had to do was to get the blood bags, the hemoglobin, from the blood bank and bring it to the surgery unit for the different, surgeries that were going on. And I had divided this system where I would actually steal the bags, bring them home. So there was a few things going on. In this period of my life, I wasn't going to the graveyard so much because I didn't have time anymore. But from now and then, I still went there. I still, when I could, I would get remains too. But it was mostly stuff that I found in the morgue. Yeah.
So when it came to like the cooking the meat, like did you boil it? Did you bake it? Like how did you cook the meat?
There was nothing like sophisticated or anything. First it was just cooking it on a pan and then trying different condiments, but extremely simple. I didn't try to, make recipes, you see in the movies like Hannibal Lecter or anything. I was just trying a few basic things. It was more like, people ask me all the time, okay, what the taste was like. And, yeah, of course I can tell you because back in those days, I would eat a lot of steak tartare. Tartare in French, it's like horse meat, like minced horse meat, and it's more or less raw. Sometimes you just basically cook, but just the surface, and you grind it through a grinder, and you eat it like that. So it's called steak tartare, and I would eat that a lot because I like the taste of raw blood. You know, it reminded me of blood more or less. So it gave me some kind of rush. And basically, this is what I did with those little strips. So yeah, another thing, people believe that it was huge chunks of things. No, no, no. It was only things that I could actually get out of the hospital. Just small strips that I would used to slice. So it wasn't huge amounts like T-bones or anything. You know what I mean? Ribeyes. No, it was small strips. But it was more or less regular. This I have to say, it was more or less regular on a regular basis. Like I would say, during 2 or 3 months, it was like 2 or 3 times a week, depending on how often we did autopsies. Yeah. So there was some consistency, if I could say, on this. With sometimes I would do it the hospital itself, and sometimes when I was home. But it wasn't just that. There was also the blood from the blood bags that I would ingest, and I think after a while, it was like some kind of craving. Some kind. It gave me some kind of rush. That's obvious. And I could even say some kind of addiction. Of course, it wasn't a physical addiction, but it was some kind of psychological addiction. I was addicted to the idea of the next time I would do it.
Can I chime
Did
in?
you ever get? Oh, go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to ask, in terms of that psychological addiction and whatnot, where does it stand today?
Oh, I'm totally fine. Yeah, totally good. But I know I'm not, in a way, because even for me, it's like 30 years ago. For people, when they first learn about it, it's like it happened yesterday. So I'm always reminded of it. So even if the thing happened like several decades ago, the word is still there, the C word. And yeah, I can't deny I play with it because I released those books. I released the Cannibal Cookbook because at the end of the day, okay, they give me this name. Why not claim it? You see what I mean? For me, it was a thing, an experience that happened. I know that this experience, for 90% of the people I interact with, this experience defines me as a person, and I don't really care. There's plenty of different words that could define me, and just one word. One word that I've never really, especially enjoyed is the word vampire, because I don't care about the character, what do you call that? The mythical character of the vampire and Dracula and all that stuff. Just it's I don't know. I feel no connection to that word. Yeah.
How did you get the
That's
moniker?
not
Was it just attached to you?
tabloids. Yeah, tabloid. Yeah. Tabloid in
Oh.
the 90s. Yeah. So, well, of course, it was also in my psychiatric evaluation. They call it vampirism. Okay, even if it's comes from a mythical thing, they still use the word. Um, so, I mean, for me, it's kind of stupid. I mean, I'm not an unrise character. See what I mean? I'm not Vampire Lestat or what's his name? The guy who shines in under the sun. You know, yeah, Edward something.
Oh, from
Twilight guy.
Twilight. Yeah,
Yeah,
Edward.
Edward
yeah.
Cullen.
No, yeah, right. No, I don't know. I understand. There's the word Paris, and there's this. It's a mix of things. People associate Paris with the vampires for some reason that I don't understand, and they associate catacombs and graveyards and those kind of things, and it creates some kind of gothic atmosphere. But me, if I had to define myself at that moment of my life, um, it would have been criminal, not, but yeah, I don't know.
Did you ever get sick from drinking blood or consuming human meat?
Yeah, yeah. There was one time the blood bag, something was off, and I felt physically sick. Yeah, it happened once. Yeah. Then I started to drink less quantities. Um, I read somewhere that after drinking, I don't know how many liters, you can actually get poison, and your liver or your system does not assimilate, and you reject it. This is why you get sick. I think people have died from it actually. So I was careful with it, but also I had access to the files of the persons, you know, since I was working there. So I was careful about that aspect too, and I was always checking on the files of the persons, and the blood that is filtered in blood banks is actually monitored, checked. They really make sure that it's perfectly safe to be transfused, I don't know the word, to another person. So at least I was sure that there were no problem with that blood. But yeah, it happened.
So Maggie, do you have any questions for Nico in regards to cannibalism and your father?
Oh,
Wait, we should
bonsoir,
introduce
Nico.
who Maggie is
Hello.
first.
Bonsoir.
Bonsoir.
How are you?
I'm good, very good. How are you?
Good, good. Well, no, I was just listening to what Nico was saying about, that it became an addiction because my father basically said that what he was doing was like an addiction in a way. Tasting human flesh and not drinking the blood, but just tasting the human flesh was basically an addiction for him. And it gave
Yeah,
him a rush.
it's a rush. Yeah, that's what I would say also. It definitely I don't think it's psychological or anything, but there's this metallic taste, and there's also the fact that it's pure adrenaline. Okay, I
Oh,
know
yeah.
that there's all those myths about adrenochrome and those kind of things. You've probably heard of them.
hmm
Some people really believe in them.
It's the endorphins. It basically gives you a high in a way.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. That's something I have not experienced with any other product that I
Mhm.
tried. So yeah,
Well,
it definitely is. Yeah,
when you did your like I said your ritual of drinking blood and eating human flesh, did you find something of cathartic, like something cathartic about it? Was it an
oh
art
yeah.
form for you?
For me, it was associated with the fact that I've always felt different. So by doing this, in a way, it was my own communion
Mm-hmm.
with the demons inside me. See what I mean? Because I
Yes.
do believe in demons. I do believe in energies. And I did feel that, I was feeding those energies by doing this. I felt like being a vessel for those energies. See, if
So
you
you
look,
basically kept those people alive through eating of their flesh and drinking of their blood.
not done by the energy, in a way. Yeah, that's definitely that. That's using the
That's funny
energy and
because
feeding on it.
Arthur had the same thing. Arthur, my
Yeah,
father, had the same exact thing, that when he ate flesh, it basically kept them alive in some form.
fascinating. Yeah. I've written one book about Russian cannibals. So I
Mm-hmm.
studied a lot of cases in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of cases in Russia that are totally unknown in Europe and the US.
Aside from Chikatilo.
Yeah, there's
Chikatilo was
Chikatilo,
like,
who's the most famous one. Yeah, but there's so many others. You wouldn't believe it. So many others that the media, the newspapers, they never talk about.
right, it's
And
kept them.
I found very intriguing cases about people who were specifically doing the cannibal thing just to have some kind of energy from it.
Right. So
And
how did
it's
you
not
deal with
only a
how
matter.
did you deal? No, but how did you deal with the backlash of that? I mean, like society would not look upon cannibalism as a normal thing to do. How did you deal with the backlash, like people, critiquing you and basically saying that was wrong?
I have never, ever since I was a kid, I've never listened to what others say.
Right.
Really,
Right.
it goes in one ear and it just gets out. I'm just not focused. It's hard to
I'm learning
explain.
the same thing myself. I'm learning the
It's
same thing myself.
I don't know. I don't know if it's me or if it's people who are like me. I don't know. It's just like it's just slides. You know what I mean? I've been on trial, so it's a
Hmm.
moment in your life when you're on a murder trial where uh, it's the epitome of being judged
Right.
because you're really judged. You're judged not only
Oh
by
yeah,
people,
absolutely.
the people who are there, but you're judged by the press. You're
Right.
judged by the people who read about your case. You're judged by everybody else. So you're judged by basically you're judged by humankind. Yeah,
Right.
that's the thing that's interesting. When you're judged by humankind and humankind decides that you are a monster with a capital M and that you are an enemy, well, you feel like an enemy. You feel like an enemy to mankind.
Right.
And even though you've done your time, in my case, I've done my time, people would say, yeah, you should have stayed in prison much longer, blah, 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 blah. It
Mhm.
just comforts me in my idea that I am an enemy to them, and they are my enemies. I have a few allies, of course, and I
Absolutely.
appreciate them, and I appreciate my allies, but um, you know, when you spend all your entire life, because I'm 52 now, all your 50 years of your life being perceived, well, not 50 years, because when I was a teenager, I wasn't, well, I felt like an enemy, but I wasn't officially an enemy. But when you spend more than 30 years of your life being called an enemy and being identified
Mhm.
as something purely evil and demonic,
Oh, of course.
your standards are really different. And yeah, I really have a hard time focusing on what people say, honestly.
Well, considering it's
Uh,
France, I mean, France would be, I mean, that would be like the epitome of, oh, you're not supposed to do that. And you see, America is a little bit more, how would you say, it's sanitized, so to speak. You know, I mean,
hmm,
America has a very closed-minded way of thinking, like the Europeans have an open mind, you know, like nudity is not a
to an
shocking
extent.
thing.
Yeah, to an extent. They have an open mind to a lot of
Yeah.
things except violence. Violence is, Europeans, they point the finger at Americans saying, yeah, it's a violent society because
Mm,
Europeans have a very strong sentiment against violence. But,
right.
Europe has been
Americans forget
built
about
on
it. You know,
violence.
I'm
Yeah,
American. You know, I mean,
yeah.
American people are like a little bit more, like I said, closed-minded, but they a little bit hypocritical in their stances because they abdicate violence, but meanwhile they'll turn around and say, "Oh no, that's wrong." So which is
Hmm,
it? Is it right or is it wrong?
yeah.
I'm actually curious if
There's
the people who tell you you should have been in prison longer, are they typically the Americans?
no, 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 no. You know what? In
Really?
my life, what I noticed, yeah, the most judgmental people I've had in my life are people in the metal scene,
Hmm.
people in the goth scene, people in the tattoo scene,
Mm.
people who are supposed to be, open-minded and, no, those are the most judgmental people I've ever met. The
Oh
most
yeah, yeah,
judgmental, oh yeah, yeah,
Wow.
definitely. There's
absolutely.
absolutely no question in my mind. I've been doing this thing with in Italy for a year now, where I actually meet people. I do meet and greets, and there's this thing that I participate to. It's called the Serial Killer Exhibition, and so it's traveling around Europe right now. And it's average people who come to me. That they take photographs. They're really curious about my not only my past, but how I deal with my current life. They're really happy to have this interaction with me because of course, it's the first and the last probably time in their life where they will approach somebody like me, and they're really curious. So they're extremely respectful most of the time. And the only times I ever had a problem of being judged by other people were people who were supposed to be in the black metal community or, in that scene or that scene who are supposed to be extremely, open-minded. Yeah,
Mm.
no, those are the people I have less and less, I feel less and less connected with. I really can't. Yeah, no.
You know, you get a following and then all of a sudden they turn on you. You know, it's like,
Yeah,
okay, he's super cool because he did this. And all of a
yeah,
sudden you do something and now they're like, oh, I got to shy away from him because it's going to bring bad luck on me or it's going to bring bad, bad publicity on me. You
yeah,
know, I had that problem because of my father. You know, I
yeah,
mean, he committed crimes. You obviously know. And
yeah.
I'm getting the I'm getting the backlash of it because I get death threats. I get, people, they're like, what are you doing in the store? You shouldn't be in the store. I'm like, what the fuck? Really, excuse
Yeah.
my French, but, euphemistically speaking. But I mean, I don't, first of all, I didn't do anything, number one.
Hmm.
And
Number one,
secondly
yeah,
of
most
all,
important.
it's a bunch of bullshit. But then again, like here in America, see, I live here in New Jersey, and what happened was, there's a lot of tattoo people over here and everything, and they think it's super cool about my father, but
Hmm.
they don't understand that he committed crimes against humanity, so to speak, according to the eyes of the law. And yes, he killed children, and that's the biggest thing that stands out, that he killed kids. Never
Hmm.
mind about the 11 prostitutes that he killed, but the kids were more of a focal point.
Hmm.
So they looked at me because I have 7 kids of my own. Like, how could you make him meet your kids? First of all, I wanted to dispel all those rumors. It was my 2 oldest kids, and they were teenagers at the time, and they had an
Hmm.
understanding of who he was. And secondly of all, my younger ones did not know him at all or anything about him until they were at least 18 years old. I couldn't tell that to them because I don't think they could understand or digest that, so to speak.
Hmm.
Hey,
But I got
Maggie.
a lot of shit over the years.
Hey, Maggie, for the people who are listening, can you tell them who your dad is?
Oh, my father's Arthur Shawcross. He was a Genovese River killer up in Rochester, New York.
Thank you. I just wanted them to know. When we were interviewing Maggie last week, we were talking, and you ended up coming up, Nico, because apparently you had communication with her dad, and
Yeah.
that's why we wanted to bring her on with you today.
Yeah,
And I
I'm really
sent
pleased to
Nico
meet
a
Maggie
copy of
for
my
the first
book.
time.
Yeah.
I'm really
And I
pleased
sent
to
you a
meet
copy.
Maggie. Yeah. We actually were with Maggie. We were discussing last year about the possibility of working on the book together. So that's something I'm really interested in. I like to give a voice to the people who don't have a voice in true crime. You know, true crime is often seen through the lens of law enforcement or journalists. Sometimes journalists who actually have nothing to do with the case itself, but just want to have a say, or forensic psychiatrists, but you know, they don't even give a voice to the persons who are close to the person, and that's what I'm trying to do with my books. Also, I've always been interested in what offenders have to say, and you know, people spend time in their cell. They write letters. Sometimes they write books, and I think those books they have a great value when you study crime and you study violence, because those books, they come from the heart usually, and they talk a lot about childhood. They talk a lot about things, very personal things that come out. So right now, for example, I'm going to tell you, I'm working on a book by a Japanese serial killer. Um, he was actually one of the youngest serial killers in Japan. He probably remember that case. He actually decapitated a little boy and put the head on
Wow.
front of the school. Very
Wow.
heavy case. But the book itself is fascinating because he actually tells how the murder fantasies came to him, how they built, the process behind them. And it's so much more interesting than any other forensic book on the subject, because this guy, he really tells it like it was, and he wants to make sure the reader understands what was going on in his mind when he was doing those things.
Right, like first person narrative, like from
Yeah,
the
exactly.
out of the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, it's very extremely important info when you study crime and those type of crime, especially. Um, and you know, I've read a lot of true crime books when I was younger, and you get this narrative. It's a side of the story. Sometimes that side of the story is true, or more or less he's trying to reach the truth. Sometimes it's just an agenda. People have an agenda when they write a book. They want to, show their side of the story, and sometimes the reality
Right.
is in
You don't get
between,
too
and you
many
have
books
to,
nowadays like that. I mean, you
yeah,
get some books nowadays that are either ghostwritten or you have people
yeah,
that basically have their interpretation of what the crime was. But if you
mm,
actually dug down deeper and see the humanistic side of the person who committed the crime to begin with, and
yeah,
get that side of the story from a family member that knows them. See, I spent 8 years with my father up in prison, but I went home at the end of the day. He had to stay there. So I basically spent 8 years with this man up until the time he died. And it was like a roller coaster going
mm,
through year after year after year. Like you said, he didn't talk about the crimes at first. It took him a while because he had to get that trust, get that, that camaraderie. He didn't know like I said, he knew I existed. I was his daughter. He knew I existed, but I didn't meet him until I was 31. So I was raised by another man. So when I found out of the existence of my father, I felt in my own theory was to reach out to him because I wanted to know what my part of myself, and plus him, he's a connection to me. So a lot of people will get that misinterpretation like, oh, well, he killed a lot of people and he cannibalized, so you must be the same way and your kids must be the same way. That's not true. I wasn't raised by him, and I have no compunction to kill anybody or drink their blood or eat their flesh. I have none of that because I wasn't raised around him.
Even if you were raised around him, it didn't mean that that would end up being the case either. And that's one
Yeah.
of the things that I think we get wrong over here is like you have this whole fascination with true crime and
Right.
you have this fascination with what happened and everything else. But when you start looking at how did we get here, that's
Right.
when people start getting uncomfortable. They don't want to look
Right.
at like when you were talking about your dad with us last week and we were talking about like the abuse that he suffered and stuff like that. That was a very human, I don't know, you just humanized him in a way that I never anticipated happening, in all honesty.
Right.
But
I read 2 books about my father and they were total bullshit. And when I read those books, it infuriated me. So I sent it up to Arthur, my father, up in prison. And naturally, the prison was like very sensitized. They're like, oh, well, he can't read this. He's not allowed to read it. But they gave it to him. He read the book. And you know what he did? He ripped the book in shreds. And he said, never, ever send me a book like that again. He was inflamed. He was like aggravated. He was mad. And thank God he wrote it in a letter. He didn't tell me that firsthand, but he said, never send that book ever again. And I tried to reach out to the person that wrote it and I got no response whatsoever. So I was like, all right, so you bullshitted about my father and now you can't even cop up to it and talk to his daughter. Give me the straight dope of what's going on.
yeah. And I
But he
applaud
was
you,
a human
Nico.
being. He was a human being and he had a lot of flaws and he was a very flawed human being. And, he may have looked big in stature, but in all sense of reality, he was like a little boy. He was very, very childish, very infantile because of his upbringing. He babbled. He talked childlike. He didn't talk like somebody that actually killed somebody. Considering the fact he didn't have that persona.
There's something to say though that people get stunted when they experience extreme trauma and
Right.
even more so when they go into prison and they stay in prison for a very long time. There's a block that kind of goes up. But I wanted to say to you, Nico, that I applaud you for doing that because I work with a lot of people who are in prison and I've been, asked like, oh my God, how can you, even deal with them? Aren't you scared? Aren't you this? And I'm like, no, we're not necessarily the sum of our past, they're still a
Right.
human at the end of the day. And,
Right.
and I'm going to treat them like that.
Exactly.
I'd rather
I have a
understand
question.
the how rather than anything else.
We live in a
Yeah,
judgmental society. That's the problem. We live in a judgmental society, and everybody's going to point the finger like, "Oh, you did this," and like you have no sin whatsoever. That's bullshit. That is total bullshit because people have sin, and people have secrets in their closet. Not to the extreme of killing somebody or eating their flesh, but they have their little idiosyncrasies and everything. And then, God forbid, it should get out to to the light of day. People are that how afraid they are.
mm. There's also a lot of people who don't really know the case. They don't know the details of the case. They will judge anyways because the word, for example, the word killer is such a strong word. And when people hear that somebody has killed somebody, they will judge whatever the circumstances, even if you explain that, oh, okay, maybe, the
Yeah, you become
interaction between the
ostracized and
victim.
briared. I mean, it's disgusting.
Yeah. I know that in my personal case, people know more or less how it happened, but they don't really know the circumstances. For example, the person who approached me, the person I killed, approached me on a device that's called cemetaries. It was like the internet back in the days, but much more primitive. And he was expected me to be much younger than I was. That's an aspect of my case that people never talk about, you know, because it's more convenient to say, "Oh yeah, a crazy cannibal killer was," you know. So this, I'm not justifying what I did. What I did was wrong, illegal, and bad, and whatever you call it. But there's always nuances in a story. So people don't know those nuances. They just have their moral dogmas, and they won't get out of them. They won't just try to think, what would they do in that situation? Would they do anything different? And no, it's easier to cast the stone, as you say. Well, I don't care about being judged myself, because I'm way beyond that. I get like, I've had death threats. I've had, for me, it's it doesn't affect me. Okay, but
Well, let
I
me ask you a
always
question, Nico.
know.
Let me ask you a question. How
Yeah,
many years did you do in time, like in prison? How long did you do?
about 8 years out of 12. I was under a specific thing that they have in France for crimes committed under what they call um, diminished responsibility.
Okay.
So for them, diminished responsibility is when a board of psychiatrists
Mm.
decide together that there were circumstances that not abolished, because this is different. Abolish means that they stop all prosecution. This is what they did with Issei Sagawa. But your responsibility, your legal responsibility, is diminished, which means, for example, for a case like mine, usually it's between 20 to life.
Wow.
And the maximum they could give me under that diminished responsibility thing was 15 years, between 10
Wow.
and 15 years. This is how they more or less decide uh, what how to do it. And at the interesting thing about my case is that my attorney, my counsel, um, had a very specific strategy in mind, and decided to use the fact that he said that we lived in a violent society, that I was watching a lot of horror movies
Ah.
and listening to demonic music, and all those things.
That you were
And
influenced by something else other than what that
yeah, he
reality.
used that a lot. Yeah, of course, the
You see,
truth
because
was
my
far.
father got 250 years in prison, and in America they give you Chaconian. I mean, they
Mm.
give you these outlandish like death sentences, like not even a death
Oh
sentence,
yeah,
basically a life sentence, like 250 years. Who's gonna live 250 years? I know I'm not. And he's gonna
I
be.
think honestly, if I would have been on trial in the US, it would have been a death penalty case, I think.
Oh yeah.
When I look at my case, I look at the circum, not the actual case itself, but the personality and the things that led to the case, the background, if you will.
Right.
It would have been a death penalty. Maybe not on a,
Depending
I
on
don't know.
what state you live in,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
guess.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
But there's
I
a
have a
good chance, I'd say.
question,
Yeah,
Nico.
there's a good chance.
Hi, I'm Jenny, by the way. Nice to meet you.
Nice
Thank
to
you for
meet you.
sharing your story.
Thank
Um,
you.
I read a couple of things. So you've done an interview. I don't know when this is from. It doesn't say. I'm not in front of my computer right now, but I did read a question for you, and it was something about your interest in girls, and you said that you only have a fetish for girls who kill. Are you currently in a relationship now?
Oh yeah, but no, it has nothing to do with that. Yeah.
But she doesn't. So can I ask what the difference is between the girl that you're in a relationship with now that doesn't kill.
I'd rather not go into
Okay,
that, if
that's
you will.
fine.
Yeah.
And then I have another
But yeah,
question.
that specific answer that I gave was a while back, I would say. So
Okay.
yeah,
I just had one
it's
more
not
question.
relevant anymore. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm.
And so there were items I read that you had taken. I understand like the wallet, the this, the that. Can I ask why the alarm clock?
Oh, it was just a thing.
It was just a thing. It was just like a
Yeah,
random
yeah.
item.
It was not only this item specifically. There was a lot of several things. It was more like trophies, you know. I'm gonna show you something on screen. I don't know if your viewers will see it. For example, you see this clock?
Yes.
Okay, this clock belonged to that guy that you see on the screen. He's called Anatoly Onapolienko. He was known as the Beast of Ukraine. Okay, and he killed about 60 people in Ukraine in the 90s. And this clock actually took it from a victim. So I got this from a journalist, a Russian journalist who was close to the case. This was not brought as evidence. It was just part of his stash, and somehow the journalist got the match. But this guy, Onoprienko, had a pile of matches like that. They were trophies. So it wasn't especially because he was into watches or anything. It was just because it was a trophy, you know?
I understand that. And you have
So,
memorabilia of your own, right? That you.
oh, yeah, plenty.
Now,
Yeah,
do you
yeah.
sell any of yours, like from your victims? Have you?
Oh, no, I've never
Okay.
done that because I could really get into trouble for doing
okay.
this.
Okay.
And plus, I have items that I used to have in my apartment back then, that I still have. And but for the case itself, no.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So I know that you talked to Arthur Shawcross, which I didn't even know about the cannibalism until we had the interview with Mags.
Yep.
Have you talked to any others over here, like Dahmer or anybody else?
Dahmer was killed right the year when I started to write to people, or maybe a few months before. So I didn't get the chance to actually get letters from him. The first, actually, it's not me who started to write people. It's one day I had mail in my cell, and it was coming from Patrick Kearney, who is a serial killer from California. Killed people and put them in trash bags. And he was writing in perfect French.
Wow.
So he was telling me that he had been in prison, in the same prison as Ed Kemper and Manson and all those people, Saran and that guy Juan Corona, and one of the hillside stranglers. So it was kind of fascinating. I started to write to him and ask him questions. He had gotten my address from a collector in Florida. And then I realized that I could actually, well, first of all, I could answer his letters. So he got my letters and I got his. There was no censorship on my part. Sometimes there was censorship, but I would say 70% of the letters I got weren't censored simply because the people who worked in my prison, they just didn't speak English. So they would see the letter, sometimes they would not even understand that the letter was coming from a correctional facility or a state prison, and they just didn't know. So I could actually write them, answer them, and I started to correspond with plenty of different inmates in the US. I think I started to write to your father in 1998, if I remember well. That must have been 1998. Yeah.
A friend of mine, Matt, actually wrote you and has spoke to you
Oh.
a few times.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's super interesting.
Oh,
I
yeah.
was telling him about today and how we had to push back the time, and he's
Okay.
unfortunately at work, but he's like, yeah, no, I spoke to him a bunch of times. I'm like, oh, really?
Yeah.
Small world.
Letters?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
I like the YouTube one that you did about when you did the Hannibal walk, when you went all and you put all your stickers on everywhere that you was. I thought that was so cool. I was gonna Nico, send me a sticker, please. You know.
Oh, well. Well,
I
yeah,
love
I got
that.
my stickers everywhere in Italy now. That's kind of
Oh
funny.
wow.
Yeah, I was making sure I was putting them in very touristy locations
Mm.
in front of all those.
I must have watched that twice. I watched that video twice. I did. I really liked it. You know, maybe because I
Yeah.
like the French accent you have. That's why. You know, because I
Ah, yeah,
failed
that's
French in
part of
high
the
school.
thing. Yeah, that's part of my persona.
You're the real
So
deal.
what about what's the guy's name? Is it Armin? The guy from
Mivas. Yeah.
which one?
At first, I didn't know how to pronounce it. It's Mivas. I thought it was Muse, like the guy in Clark's. Jason Muse. But no, it's Mivas. He's a German guy who actually contacted another guy on a forum called Cannibal Cafe. And that person wanted to be eaten. So
Oh,
they
yeah.
more or less did a
My
death.
daughter read that book.
Oh, yeah. Fascinating case. I never actually got in touch with him. I wanted to try several times, but I wasn't sure he was speaking English or what. And then I saw this interview where he was speaking perfect English. But then I heard by other people that he wasn't answering letters. But I went to his place several times. It's an abandoned house. It used to be an abandoned house because now it has been burned down.
Wow.
And the funny thing is, first time I go there, I saw this freezer, right? And there was this sticker written Polizei on it, which means police in German. It was actually a trial exhibit that they had brought back in the house. Usually they destroy those things. And that was the freezer where he had kept the remains of his victims for over there for 8 months, more or less.
Wow.
So sometimes he would like cut up a slice and cook it and set up a nice table and try a different recipe from his mom's cookbook. So the freezer were there, and I was like, okay. So first of all, the first thing I did was more or less, try to see what were the local laws regarding abandoned buildings.
Mm.
Because I think I was the only one who was actually getting stuff and selling them online. So I was, wondering, is this legal? Or will I get any problems? Turns out that it was abandoned for more than 20 years, this house. So all the stuff that was in the place was actually abandoned stuff.
Wow.
So, which is crazy, there was the fridge, there was torture instruments that I found. There was, a cage.
That's crazy.
Yeah, the cage where he actually, kept his victims, because several people went to see him. They weren't all killed, but they were part of S&M games that he was playing with them. So all those things that were there. And I was like, I just can't leave them like that. They are literally rotting away, because there were holes in the ceiling, and there was water dripping, and there were people who were sometimes trying to start fires in that place. So I decided to bring them home, and now they're in this exhibition I'm curating, and thousands of visitors actually see those items. And the house since has been destroyed. So I'm kind of proud of having saved those items from destruction.
Mm. Well, that's like my father. My father got cremated. So the
Mm.
weirdest thing I've ever gotten from a memorabilia person was like, can I have a little bit of his ashes and I'll pay you for it? And now I always
Wow.
felt that, selling my father's ashes would be like exploitation on him, because this
Mm.
poor man went through hell when he was growing up. So I couldn't see myself selling his ashes to just some random, collector,
Yeah.
because, this guy wanted to inject it in his penis. He wanted to
Whoa.
take the ashes and inject it in his penis. And I was like, how sick is that? I'm
Yeah.
like, okay.
It reminds me of all those things that were going on around Manson's ashes, and
Yeah.
it's crazy stuff too. I mean, it's very shady.
It is.
There's this guy in France. It was kind of funny because he turned out to be a fraud. Everybody realized he was a fraud, but he was this guy who did a couple of interviews with Otis Toole and Ed Camper. He did them in the 90s, and then he told everybody that he got into serial killers because his wife has been killed by a serial killer. He never said the name, of course. And then he said in one of his interviews, because he became some kind of expert on French TV about serial killers, and he said in one of the interviews that he did that he actually had ashes from Gerard Schaefer, who was a serial killer in Florida, and that he was selling them with his latest book. So of course,
God.
of course, it
Promotional
was
giveaway.
it was
Buy
a
a book, I'll give you some
publicity.
ashes.
People actually reached out for his family. The family confirmed that he never had access to any of that, and they even posted pictures of the urn, of his urn, because they kept the urn at their place, and they said, no, the urn is here. We do not know this French journalist. We do not know who he is. Leave us alone. And there's people who are making up stories
Yeah. Because you
to
find a
sell.
lot of like unsavory people that they take memorabilia and they'll exploit it. They'll
Oh
exploit it.
yeah.
Like I only have like two things in my file. I have his ashes. I have his some of his letters, and a drawing or two of my kids, and his prison shirt. That's the only thing I have of his. I mean,
Okay.
people they contact me that says, "Oh, are you willing to sell it?" I don't think I am. Because I mean, listen, times are tough in this world, especially here in America. I mean, the economy sucks. But
Yeah.
I don't think I would get that desperate to sell my father like that. I really couldn't.
Yeah. No, I can totally understand that. Yeah.
I mean, if you want to like display it and like in a like what you do, if you wanted to
Mm,
display it and you said to me, "Oh, Maggie, can I borrow the ashes to display it around here, there, and everywhere?" Okay,
mm,
fine. So we come to a mutual agreement. You display the ashes or whatever. At least
mm.
we know that we have a good give and take between the both of us. There's no exploitation there.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. It's totally, you know, people don't realize at the end of the day, it's personal stories, all this.
Yeah, right.
Personal stories. Um, we have the diamond glasses in our expo, one pair, because there's two other pairs. There's one in Alcatraz East, which is a museum in Tennessee. And I think Zach Baggins, that's the other one. I'm
Oh,
not really
Zach
sure.
Bagans.
But
Yeah.
yeah, there's, this guy. Okay, so there's three pairs around. The pair we have, we got it from Taylor from Collectibles, who was in touch with people who worked for Lionel Dahmer. And there were glasses that he used between the age of 20 to 25. So there's this story around those glasses.
Right. Exactly.
Exactly. For us, it's a piece of history. It's a part of his life, and the glasses are just okay. It's of course impressive to actually see the glasses, because it's one of those objects in true crime that's immediately
Right.
recognizable. You immediately, it's like a iconic. But at the same time, we want to tell the story behind the glasses and say, okay, this is a time in his life. He was living with his grandma. Next to it, we have actually a letter that he sent to his grandma, where, objects, especially in an exhibition like that, it's not only the the iconic thing behind the object, but it's also the story behind it.
Right.
And so, you know, another example, we have a section on Gacy, and we could easily have many Gacy paintings in that room. There's other museums in the US who are
Right.
specialized in Gacy stuff. They have dozens and dozens and dozens of Gacy paintings. He did more than 2,000 paintings in his lifetime. It was like actually a factory of people
Wow.
doing elements of the painting for him, and he would only put his signature on the painting. So it would have been easy to have an entire room completely covered with Gacy paintings, but we only have one, because for me, that painting that's in the museum, it really represents Gacy's mind. It's one of the skull clowns that he did, and
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
for me, it's really iconic. And more than the painting itself, it's the story behind the painting, and what
Right.
it would represent in the Gacy's life. There's
Considering
also
the
a
fact that
letter.
he did, I mean, if you look at his
Yeah.
artwork, like my father, he basically drew paintings of my kids, but he basically drew them, and they're
Yeah.
basically, pencil, but there was a beauty about it. There was
Yeah.
something like like a quiet beauty to it, because here's a guy that was revered as a killer, a serial killer. He was a cannibal, but he could draw such beautiful artwork. Where did that come from? Where did that motivate him to do that?
Yeah.
Was it something that he was sitting around one day and says, "Oh, I'm going to take up art and everything"? I got
I
into
think that
artwork right after
I
my
think that
husband
art
passed away.
created by killers and criminals, they have a story. They convey so much emotions,
Yeah.
and so much things. There's one example. I wrote a book about Ramirez and his art,
Right.
because that's an example of the first drawings that he did when he was in prison. Ramirez was never a good artist. It was really basic,
Mm-hmm.
really bad. But the first drawings that he did were after he was on trial were like pentagrams and all those, satanic stuff, and demons and things like that. And then he got censored. He couldn't do it anymore because the prison said, no, we can't allow you to do that anymore.
Mm.
And then the art changed, totally changed. It was pin-ups, cartoons,
Mm-hmm.
SpongeBob's,
Yeah.
this kind of stuff. And there was no soul anymore to the art. He lost his soul. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's fascinating too to see the evolution sometimes. There's one artist that I really liked. I used to write in for 3 or 4 years. It's called Danny Rolling in Florida. He was on death row. He's the guy who more or less inspired the Scream movies, the
Really?
franchise.
Mm.
Yeah, they say that the guy who wrote the very first Scream movie, was influenced by the case. So he had very interesting artwork. It was about angels and demons, because he sincerely thought that he was possessed when he committed the
Wow.
crimes. So the paintings are very religious at the same time, and they have this unique touch. So it's was one of my favorite artists that I worked with.
There's a beauty in art. There is. I mean, because I lost my husband 3 years ago, and I couldn't draw for my life. I couldn't do anything. So I started painting as sort of like a therapy sort of thing. So I got into an art gallery, and I was doing a lot of three-dimensional artwork. So now what I do is I make candles for a living, and most of my candles you have molds, and you could pour the wax in the molds. That's basic stuff. Anybody
Yeah.
could do that. But I basically been doing a lot of freestyle stuff. Like having the like things come out of the wax. Like
Yeah.
really three-dimensional. And I was the type of person that when I was in the art gallery, a lot of the artists didn't want you to touch the painting, and that happened because of the fact that you don't want to damage the painting, the oils in your hands. I encouraged people that came to see my artwork to touch it, because you got to get the feel of it.
Totally.
I mean, that's the whole thing about art. I mean, you have to like, you could listen. You could paint a canvas. I mean, you see a lot of that. People
Yeah.
paint. Oh, that's beautiful. It's a landscape. Oh, it's Renoir. It's this. It's that. Fine. But if you see something 3-dimensional come out at you, like, all right, I'm going to take notice now. I'm going to I want to touch it. I really want to touch it. And I never discouraged anybody to not touch my artwork at all. Even my candles. I mean, my candles, they jump out at you. I do the 3-dimensional thing with little figures, and I put it on top of the wax, and it looks like it's real, but it's like miniature. But that's like my father was the same way. He was like, I'm not an artist, but I want to draw what I'm feeling inside of me. The human aspect of that person.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. And there's still a book to be written about, this kind of art.
Yeah.
So,
There should be a book about, about prison art, because I
Yeah.
mean, you had like from World War I, they had trench art. A lot of the guys were over in France.
Exactly.
And they were doing a lot of trench art, and that's worth a lot of money nowadays. But what
Yeah.
about the aspects of what prisoners do? And what about people that come out of prison and they're rehabilitated, and they're so like encapsulated by artwork, and not about their crimes, about what they're feeling inside of them. Is it
Yeah.
coming out? Let it come out that way.
Sometimes I say it in interviews, but violence is a way of expressing things,
Yeah.
and art is another way of expressing things. So sometimes people use, when they don't use violence anymore for different reasons, they use art.
Yeah. It
To
comes
express
out
the
that
same.
way. See,
Yeah.
you could say, okay, it's safer that way for it to come out in art, because no one's getting hurt. But then you got
Yeah.
some people like, oh, I'm offended. I mean, screw you. You're offended, then don't look at it if it
Exactly.
offends you.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just like reading a book. I mean, you could choose to read the book. If it's offensive, then don't read it.
Or we are in a society and in a world where some people want to have a say on anything, and they want their voice to matter, just because nowadays everybody can get their 5 minutes of fame.
Right.
And those people, even if they have absolutely nothing to say, they will come up with the stupidest things, and they will say, oh, I identify with this, I have found this new thing, I'm like this, I'm like that, just to be different, or claim to be different, or claim to bring something new. But no, it's social media and the internet, they just show us that 90% of people, they don't have the creative
They're a
means
bunch
to
of
express
voyeurs.
themselves. Yeah.
That's what it is. Social media is basically nothing but voyeurism. On a spectrum.
Exactly.
It's a voyeurism. Now, if you have some talent, and you're gonna watch it and everything, and you're gonna critique it, and you're gonna criticize it, then I like to see you do something that's gonna show me that I can respect. If not, I can say, well, that's a load of shit. I mean, that's crap. But then you think it's not crap, but I think it's crap. So I'm entitled to my opinion too. And there's my 5 minutes of fame.
Yeah, exactly.
I wouldn't be that nice.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be that nice.
So I know we only have about 15 minutes left. Nico, can you talk about Serial Pleasures and what your business is all about, and what kind of products are on there, and your books for that matter?
So I have this website, serialpleasures.com, and I sell books mostly. T-shirts too, and several other things. But I'm trying to build this catalog of books, and I'm working with different authors. I work with, for example, Taylor from Cult Collectibles. We've been publishing several books together. We are trying to gather documents on well-known case. For example, we published the Dahmer psych reports, which are extremely interesting, and other interesting books. I published also the books of Issei Sagawa, the Japanese cannibal. He wrote his biography when he was in prison in France. It's called In the Fog. It's an amazing document. It's very, very fascinating if you're into true crime. And I've published book about my photography as well, and several other things. So I do sell some murder, mostly stuff that I found at the Armin Maiva's mansion, abandoned mansion, and action figures and stuff like that.
Me and you got to collaborate one of these days, Nico.
Oh yeah, definitely.
to.
Yeah, we will talk.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when you say you're collecting documents on stuff, what are you doing specifically?
For example, last week I published a book called Pogo and a Night Stalker. So it's basically letters that John Wayne Gacy and Ramirez sent to their fans. There's even a few pages on the infamous John Wayne Gacy jokes, which are quite funny. It's just jokes that he would send around, and they're kind of, it's something else. Definitely, you have to read them to see what I'm talking about. There's there's plenty of documents that were never seen before. We released a few books on Ted Bundy too, letters that he sent to several people, but also these autopsy files, which he commented. The autopsy files of his victims, which actually did comments on them. So it's kind of fascinating to read that. I did a book on Jonestown. That was a really cool book because it's actual photos taken by the U.S. Army, the U.S. Air Force, on the compound. And there's the autopsy pictures of the victims of the Jonestown massacre. And there's autopsy pictures of Jim Jones himself. So they were published for the first time. And what else? I did a series of books on Russian serial killers and cannibals. So there's 3 volumes. So each time there's 20 different stories, because when I started to do some research on Russian serial killers, I found out that there was at least 100 serial killers in Russia who committed their crimes in the 20th and the 21st century. So it was it still is a fascinating journey into that part of criminal history, because most of the cases we have never heard about in the West. So I had friends who are journalists in Russia who helped me with that. I had access to documents that were never published in the West before. That's very. I'm really proud of those books, because for me, they bring something new to true crime law, and I hope that they will be used for research and for YouTube videos or whatever, or documentaries as a basis, because that's what I wanted. I wanted to show those cases and show those documents.
Very cool. I like documents.
Me too.
That's one of the things that I do the most. I do a lot of research.
My idea is to actually do some kind of encyclopedia, worldwide encyclopedia of serial murder. So I'm doing Russia, but I also did Japan. I want to do Southeast Asia after that, and South America.
What's
There's a lot of cases.
What's the craziest one you've come across in Russia or Southeast Asia? Or
Oh
whatever?
wow, there's so many. There's a guy called Golovkin. He's basically the Russian John Wayne Gacy.
Wow.
So he was committing his crimes in Moscow, in the suburbs of Moscow. He had this car, which at the time in Russia, only officials they had cars, but he would use this car to pick up teenagers, and he would bring them to his shed. He would say, "Oh, you're gonna help me actually break into that shed." So he would say that it was somebody else's shed. They would break into the shed, and it was actually a dungeon. So they would end up in the dungeon. He would torture them for days and days and days, and yeah, it's awful. He would actually make suits with their skin. So he would strip them of their skin, and he would bury them in the woods. He would cannibalize some of them. The case is really well known in Russia because it happened at the same time than Chikatilo.
Yes.
Chikatilo became internationally famous for a few different reasons. But if you're talking to people who live in Moscow, they know more about the Golovkin case than the Chikatilo case. Chikatilo was south of Russia, in Rostov, so a different part of Russia, but Muscovites. There are a few other famous serial killers. They had one called the Hippopotamus. It was this huge guy who killed, I think he killed 19 people in a park, and he was a necrophile. He would actually have intercourse with the dead bodies in the park. And there was this guy, he actually wrote a novel before being arrested about his crimes. So it's a fascinating case. There's a lot of cannibal cases that are quite fascinating. There's one of my favorites is a guy in Kazakhstan called Jumagadayev, and he was known as Iron Teeth or Iron Fangs because of his metal teeth. And he would specifically hunt down women to butcher them and eat them because he thought that he would gain powers, superpowers, from drinking their blood and eating their flesh. So he had this thing going on. And he was sent to a psychiatric hospital, and he escaped.
Wow.
Two times.
Wow.
Two times. So he was basically hiding in the mountains for 2 years.
Damn.
He said that he didn't eat any meat during those 2 years, which is kind of funny when you know the case.
Yeah, right?
But yeah, no, he was quite a character. He did tons and tons of interviews with the local press and television. You can, well, if you go online and look through Russian YouTube, you will find his interviews. It's kind of fascinating, but of course you have to more or less understand the language.
Right.
And no, fascinating cases. You can find all of those cases in my books. There's two versions of this book, actually, of those books. I did two versions. There's a hardback with photos, and there's a paperback with no photos. So different budgets for people if they prefer to buy a cheaper version. And there's also a what's it called, a digital version of that book, even cheaper. But the best is, of course, the hardback one because there's all the photos and yeah.
I know what I want for Christmas.
Yeah. So there's the first ones I call Russian serial killers maniacs, because this is how they call them in Russia. They don't call them serial killers, they call them maniacs. The maniac of this, the maniac of that. That's how the press called them back in the days. Now they kind of use the word serial killer, but not really because it's an American word.
Right.
So
and Russia does not have serial killers.
Yeah, well, now they admit that they have a huge problem. Especially there was a case lately. It's called the werewolf of Siberia. His name is Popkov. He killed 80 sex workers in Siberia.
Wow.
So that's quite a huge number of people. And when the case happened, like 15 years ago, they realized that they had a problem. And they started to talk about the fact that, yes, there were serial killers in Russia.
Mm.
That was the first time where they actually used the word serial killer for a serial killer. Even in Chikatilo wasn't called a serial killer, but then he was called a maniac, the maniac of
Yeah.
Rostov, or the
Mhm.
monster of Rostov, but never used serial killer. Now they don't care. And now they
Yeah.
use serial killers in their army to send them to Ukraine to fight against Ukrainians. This is a proven fact. There's a case in one of my books of a serial killer who was convicted of 3 murders. He was released by Putin, and he actually died in Ukraine while fighting Ukrainians.
You
So
see
they
that? They
actually,
can clear out the whole prison population like that.
yeah,
Because we
they're
have a big
actually
problem
doing
here
this.
with that. They don't want to see, the politicians don't want to pay for prisons or take care of the prisoners, right? So they'll
Yeah.
fall off to the wayside. Then they'll commit, as soon as they get released, they'll commit the same thing all over again. It's like a constant cycle. It's a vicious cycle. So if you basically take them out of prison when they get released and put them into military service, then at least they're out of harm's way. They're actually killing. They're satisfying their urge. I'm not saying I'm advocating war or anything like that, but you want to like cut the prison population. You got to like have the European way of thinking.
It's really special about Russia because imagine you were at war with, I don't know, say Mexico,
Mm.
and then the president says, okay, too many young Americans are dying in Mexico, so let's empty our prisons.
Yeah.
Let's use all those prisoners that are on death row and send them to Mexico.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
This has consequences, and I don't know. I'm not taking, sides on the war between Ukraine and Russia. It's local politics. I know
Right.
that people like to have sides nowadays.
Mm.
Personally, I'm not taking sides because I have nobody in my, close around me who's here or there. So, but it's just to show you that, prisoners, there's different countries and different ways to treat them.
Yeah. True.
Mm.
All right. Is there any more questions before we wrap it up with Nico?
No, I'm good.
glad I got to meet you.
Me too.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Au revoir.
Yeah,
Au
thank you
revoir.
for taking the time, and we really appreciate it. And maybe in the near future we can set something up
Yeah,
again. If you're not too busy.
anytime. Yeah, no worries. Thank you
I'll
again for
brush up on
inviting
my
me.
French.
Yeah, me too. I'll probably end up cursing at you.
I can say, je m'appelle Ami. Et vous, comment vous
good.
appelez-vous? That's it.
She
Nico.
m'appelle Maggie. That's the only thing I know.
Good. That's good enough for us. That's perfect.
Well, thank you.
Okay. I bid you bye-bye. Farewell.
All right. Thank you, Nico.
Au
See
revoir.
you.
Bye.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.